The dust had barely settled in the Bentonville, Arkansas courthouse when Hannah Whitmore felt her entire world collapse beneath her feet like a mine shaft, giving way to darkness. Judge Cornelius Hartwell, the circuit judge who rode through these parts twice a year to dispense what folks optimistically called justice, had just ruled against her claim to the 200 acres of prime farming land her father had worked until his dying day. The land that should have been hers. The land that represented everything her family had built in this unforgiving corner of Arkansas since 1873. Now, in the summer of 1881, it was slipping through her fingers like water through a sieve, and there wasn't a thing she could do about it. The deed presented by Mr. Silas Crawford is legitimate, Judge Hartwell had declared in his measured tone that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else than this sweltering courtroom. Miss Whitmore has failed to produce sufficient evidence to counter his claim. The land is hereby awarded to Mr. Crawford. Hannah stood frozen in place, her 22 years feeling suddenly like 100. The black dress she wore, still mourning her father who had died 6 months prior, seemed to tighten around her chest until she could barely breathe. Around her, the courtroom erupted in murmurs and whispers, some sympathetic, others gleeful. Silas Crawford, a land speculator from Little Rock with slicked-back hair and a smile like a rattlesnake, was already shaking hands with his lawyer. "Miss Whitmore, I'm truly sorry," her attorney, an elderly man named Thomas Burke, whispered beside her. His hand trembled slightly as he gathered his papers. "Without the original deed, there was simply no way to prove your father's ownership. That forged document Crawford produced looked authentic enough to fool anyone." "It's a lie," Hannah said, her voice barely above a whisper but sharp as broken glass. "My father bought that land fair and square from the Henderson family in 1873. I was there when the papers were signed. I was 10 years old, but I remember it clear as day." "I believe you," Burke said, and his eyes suggested he truly meant it. But believing and proving are two different things in a court of law. Hannah felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of these people. Not in front of Crawford, who was now looking at her with an expression that might have been pity if it wasn't so clearly triumph. She turned and walked out of the courthouse, her spine straight and her head high, even as everything inside her screamed. The August heat hit her like a physical blow when she stepped outside. Bentonville was a growing town, booming with the arrival of the railroad 2 years prior, but today it felt like a prison. The wooden sidewalks were crowded with people going about their business, and Hannah pushed through them blindly, heading toward the livery stable where she'd left her horse that morning. "Miss Whitmore." "Hannah, wait." She didn't recognize the voice at first. It was deep and urgent, with a slight drawl that marked the speaker as someone who'd spent time in Texas. Hannah turned to see a man striding toward her, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. He wore dusty trail clothes, a battered hat, and had the kind of face that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. "Do I know you?" Hannah asked, her voice still tight with the effort of holding herself together. "No, madam, you don't. Name's Yates Novak. I'm a cattle driver, just came up from Texas with a herd bound for Kansas City. We stopped here for supplies." He pulled off his hat, revealing dark hair that needed a trim. "I was in the courthouse just now, had some business with the land office, and I couldn't help but overhear your case." "Then you heard I lost everything." Hannah turned away. "If you'll excuse me, I need to go figure out where I'm going to live now that I don't have a home." "That's just it, Miss Whitmore. I don't think you should have lost." Yates moved to block her path, not aggressively but with the kind of determination that suggested he wasn't easily dismissed. "I think Silas Crawford is a fraud and a cheat, and I think I might be able to prove it." Hannah felt something flicker in her chest. Hope, maybe, or just the memory of what hope used to feel like. "What are you talking about?" "Not here," Yates said, glancing around at the crowded street. "Is there somewhere we can talk? Somewhere private?" Common sense told Hannah she shouldn't go anywhere alone with a stranger, but desperation made its own rules. She studied his face, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motives, but all she saw was earnestness and something else. Anger, maybe. The righteous kind. "There's a restaurant 2 blocks down," she said finally. "The Copper Bell. It's quiet this time of day." Yates nodded and fell into step beside her. They walked in silence, Hannah acutely aware of the curious glances they were drawing. Bentonville wasn't so big that a woman couldn't walk with a strange man without it becoming gossip by supper time. But right now, Hannah couldn't bring herself to care. The Copper Bell was indeed quiet, with only 2 other tables occupied. Hannah chose a spot in the back corner, and Yates sat across from her, placing his hat on the empty chair beside him. When the owner, a kindly woman named Mrs. Chen who'd emigrated from California, came over to take their order, Yates ordered coffee for them both. "Now," Hannah said once they were alone, "tell me what you know about Silas Crawford." Yates leaned forward, his voice low. "About 3 years ago, I was working on a ranch outside of Dallas. Crawford came through trying to buy up land, same as he's doing here. He had documents that looked official, claiming he had rights to various properties. One of them was the ranch where I was working. The owner, a man named Jack Peters, fought the claim. What happened? Peters lost, just like you did today. Crawford produced a deed that looked legitimate and Peters couldn't prove otherwise. Lost his ranch, lost everything. Died 6 months later. Some said it was a broken heart, but I think it was the shame of it all." Yates's jaw tightened. "But here's the thing. After Peters died, I got to talking with some other folks who'd been swindled by Crawford. There was a pattern. He always targeted properties where the original owner had died or the documentation might be questioned. And he always used the same lawyer, a man named Vincent Mercer." "Crawford's lawyer today was Vincent Mercer," Hannah said, her heart beginning to beat faster. "Exactly. Now, I'm no lawyer, but I've been around enough to know that when the same 2 men pull the same scheme in multiple states, there's something rotten at the core." Yates paused as Mrs. Chen brought their coffee. Once she'd left, he continued. "After I left that ranch, I heard rumors. Whispers about a forger in Little Rock who specialized in creating fake land deeds. Nobody knew his name, but people said he worked exclusively for Crawford." "Rumors don't win court cases," Hannah said, but she could feel the hope building despite herself. "Judge Hartwell isn't going to reverse his decision based on hearsay." "No, but evidence would. Real, solid evidence." Yates wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "I've been following Crawford's trail for 2 years now, working cattle drives, but always keeping an ear out for news about him. I've collected testimonies from 7 different people who lost their land to him under suspicious circumstances. I've got names, dates, and details about the forged documents. What I don't have is the forger himself or physical proof of the forgery. Then what good is any of it? Because now I know where to look. Before today, I was tracking blind, but something the lawyer said in court tipped me off." Yates pulled a small notebook from his pocket and flipped through it. "Mercer mentioned that the deed was recorded in Little Rock in June of 1873. That's specific. And if it was recorded, there should be a record book." Hannah felt her pulse quicken. "My father's original deed was also recorded in 1873. June 18th, specifically. Then we need to get to Little Rock and examine those records. If Crawford's deed is forged, there might be discrepancies. Different ink, different handwriting, signs of alteration. And if we're really lucky, we might find that the supposed recording never actually happened, or happened at a time that doesn't match the paperwork. Hannah raised an eyebrow. Mr. Novak, I appreciate your concern, but why are you doing this? You don't know me. This isn't your fight. Yates was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee as if it held answers. When he looked up, his eyes held a shadow of old pain. Jack Peters was a good man. He gave me a job when I needed one, treated me fair, and taught me about cattle ranching. I wasn't there when he needed me. I was off on a drive when Crawford took his land, and by the time I got back, it was all over. I've been carrying that guilt around for 2 years, watching Crawford do the same thing to other people and feeling powerless to stop it. He met her eyes directly. Today, in that courthouse, I saw the same look on your face that Peters must have had, and I realized I could either walk away again or I could finally do something about it. I choose to do something. Hannah felt something shift inside her, like a door opening that she hadn't known was closed. This stranger, this cowboy who owed her nothing, was offering her what no one else had, a chance to fight back. Little Rock is a 3-day ride from here, she said slowly. And I don't have much money. Crawford's claim means I can't even mortgage the land to raise funds. I've got money saved from the cattle drive. Not a fortune, but enough for travel expenses and to hire a good lawyer if we need one. Yates smiled for the first time, and Hannah noticed it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and somehow more hopeful. And before you protest about accepting charity, consider it an investment. If we can prove Crawford's a fraud, there's a chance we can help all the people he's swindled, not just you. Hannah wanted to say yes immediately, but caution held her back. You realize that if Crawford is as crooked as you say, he might not take kindly to us investigating him. This could be dangerous. I've faced down stampeding cattle, rattlesnakes, and a tornado in Oklahoma territory, Yates said. I think I can handle one crooked land speculator. Hannah found herself smiling for the first time since her father's death. It felt strange, like a muscle she'd forgotten how to use. All right, Mr. Novak, we have a deal. When do we leave? Call me Yates, and I'd say first light tomorrow. That gives us time to prepare, and it gets us out of town before Crawford realizes what we're up to. He extended his hand across the table. Partners? Hannah shook his hand, feeling the calluses earned from hard work and the steady strength in his grip. Partners. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Hannah returned to the small house in town where she'd been staying since her father's death, the farmhouse itself being too painful to inhabit alone. She packed light, a change of clothes, her father's old pocket watch, and the few papers she had related to the property. Everything else she left behind, either to be reclaimed if they won or abandoned if they lost. Yates met her at the livery stable as the sun rose over Bentonville, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He'd acquired a second horse and had both animals loaded with supplies for the journey. Hannah noticed he wore a gun belt now, though the revolver sat easy on his hip like it belonged there. Ready, he asked, as I'll ever be. Hannah mounted her horse, a sturdy mare named Patience, and adjusted her riding skirt. She'd worn practical clothes, knowing the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. They rode out of Bentonville as the town was waking, heading south toward Little Rock. The Arkansas summer was in full force, and within an hour, Hannah could feel sweat trickling down her back. But the discomfort was a small price to pay for the chance to reclaim what was rightfully hers. Yates proved to be a good traveling companion. He knew when to talk and when to let silence settle between them. As they rode through the rolling hills and thick forests of Arkansas, he told her about his life on the trail, about the vast herds of cattle and the endless sky of Texas. In turn, Hannah found herself talking about her father, about growing up on the farm, about her mother who died of fever when Hannah was 15. "It was just the two of us after that," she said as they stopped to water the horses at a creek. "Papa and me. He taught me everything about farming, about the land. He used to say that land was the only thing worth having because it was the only thing they weren't making any more of." She smiled sadly. "Guess he never counted on someone just stealing it out from under us." "We're going to get it back," Yates said with quiet conviction. "I promise you that." Hannah wanted to believe him, but she'd had too many disappointments lately to trust in promises. Still, there was something about the way he said it, the certainty in his voice, that made her want to have faith. They made camp that night in a clearing off the main road. Yates built a fire and cooked salt pork and beans while Hannah saw to the horses. As darkness fell and the stars emerged overhead, they sat on opposite sides of the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across their faces. "Can I ask you something?" Hannah said after a while. "Sure. Why cattle driving? You seem educated, well-spoken. You could do other work, maybe settle somewhere." Yates poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the night. "I tried settling once. Was engaged to a girl in San Antonio, had a job at a mercantile, was planning to buy a house. Everything that society says a man should want." He was quiet for a moment. "But every day I felt like I was suffocating, like the walls were closing in. The girl, her name was Martha. She was nice enough, but we didn't really know each other. We were going through the motions because it's what people expected. What happened? I called off the engagement, broke her heart, hurt my reputation, disappointed my family. But I couldn't go through with it. I took a job on a cattle drive and discovered that's where I belonged. On the open range with nothing but sky above and earth below. It's hard work and dangerous sometimes, but it's honest, and it's free." He looked up at her. "Does that make sense?" "More than you know," Hannah said softly. "After my mother died, there were plenty of men in town who thought I should remarry my father or find a husband of my own. They couldn't understand why I wanted to work the farm, why I didn't want to be some rancher's wife tending house and having babies. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that life if it's what you choose, but it wasn't what I wanted. I wanted the land, the work, the independence. And now Crawford's trying to take all that away. He's trying, but he hasn't succeeded yet." They talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams, and Hannah realized with some surprise that she felt more comfortable with this stranger than she had with people she'd known for years. There was an ease between them, a natural compatibility that felt rare and precious. The second day of travel brought them through more rugged terrain. They stopped briefly in a small settlement to rest the horses and get a proper meal. While Yates negotiated with the livery owner about grain for the animals, Hannah went to the general store to replenish their supplies. "You folks heading to Little Rock?" the store owner, an older man with a tobacco-stained beard, asked as he weighed out coffee beans. "We are," Hannah said. "Why do you ask? Just be careful. There's been reports of trouble on the road, some gang of thieves working the area, targeting travelers. They hit a stagecoach last week, took everything of value." He wrapped the coffee in brown paper. "Not meaning to scare you, just thought you should know." Hannah thanked him and met Yates outside, relaying the warning. He listened seriously, one hand resting unconsciously on his revolver. "We'll be extra cautious," he said. "Keep off the main road where we can, make camp in hidden spots. I don't intend to lose you or this mission to some outlaws." The way he said, "lose you," made Hannah's heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with fear of outlaws. She pushed the feeling aside, reminding herself that this was a business arrangement, nothing more. They were partners in a legal fight, not courting. But still, the feeling lingered as they rode on. That night, they camped in a dense thicket of trees, building only a small fire that couldn't be seen from the road. As they ate a cold supper of bread and cheese, Yates told her more about his investigation into Crawford's activities. "There's a woman in Little Rock, a widow named Alice Brennan. She lost her boarding house to Crawford 2 years ago. She was one of the first people I talked to when I started looking into his dealings." He pulled out his notebook and showed Hannah pages filled with neat handwriting. "She told me that before the trial, a man came to see her. He said he worked for Crawford and that if she contested the claim, things would get difficult for her. Threats, essentially. Did she report it to the authorities?" She tried. "They said there was no proof, that it was her word against Crawford's. And since Crawford had friends in high places, including some lawmen, nothing came of it." Yates closed the notebook. "That's been the pattern everywhere. Crawford is careful. He covers his tracks, intimidates witnesses, and uses the legal system to his advantage. Then how are we supposed to beat him? By being smarter and more determined than he expects. Men like Crawford, they get comfortable with winning. They start to get sloppy, and when they do, that's when you strike." Yates met her eyes across the fire. "We'll find the evidence we need, Hannah. I feel it in my bones." Hannah wanted to share his confidence, but the closer they got to Little Rock, the more doubts crept in. What if they couldn't find proof? What if the records had been destroyed or altered? What if Crawford was too well connected to touch? She tried to push these thoughts away, but they haunted her as she lay in her bedroll that night, staring up at the stars through the gaps in the trees. She must have fallen asleep eventually, because she woke to Yates shaking her shoulder gently, his hand over her mouth in a signal for silence. It was still dark, the fire reduced to cold ashes. Yates leaned close and whispered directly into her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Someone's coming. 3 riders on the road, moving slow. Could be nothing, but I don't want to take chances. Stay quiet and stay low." Hannah's heart hammered in her chest as she slowly sat up, every small sound seeming loud as thunder in the darkness. Yates had moved to the edge of their camp, his revolver drawn, his body tense and ready. Through the trees, Hannah could see the faint glow of lantern light on the road and hear the creak of leather and low voices. "You sure they came this way?" one voice asked. "Saw their tracks leading off the road here," another responded. "Man and a woman from the look of it. Should have decent money if they're traveling to the city. Outlaws." The store owner's warning had been accurate. Hannah felt fear coil in her stomach, but she forced herself to stay calm. She'd lived through droughts, storms, and her father's death. She could survive this too. Yates moved back to her side with the silence of a hunting cat. "When I give the signal, we're going to lead the horses deeper into the woods. We need to put distance between us and them without making noise. Can you do that?" Hannah nodded, not trusting her voice. Together, moving with agonizing slowness, they gathered their belongings and led Patience and Yates's horse, a gelding named Storm, away from the camp. The forest floor was carpeted with fallen leaves that whispered with every step, and Hannah was certain the outlaws would hear them. But luck was on their side. The thieves were arguing among themselves about where exactly their quarry had gone, and the noise covered the soft sounds of Hannah and Yates's escape. They walked for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, leading the horses through the darkness until Yates finally deemed it safe to stop. They were in a small ravine now, well hidden from the road and anyone searching from above. "We'll wait here until dawn," Yates whispered. "It's too dangerous to travel in the dark, and the outlaws will likely give up their search once the sun rises." They settled down to wait, sitting close together for warmth as the temperature had dropped. Hannah found herself shaking, the aftermath of fear and adrenaline making her body betray her attempts at composure. Without a word, Yates put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. "You did good back there," he said quietly. "Stayed calm, moved quiet. A lot of folks would have panicked." "I don't feel very calm right now," Hannah admitted, her voice shaky. "That's normal. Fear always hits hardest after the danger's past." His arm tightened around her slightly. "But we're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you, Hannah, I swear it." She believed him. More than that, she realized with a start that she trusted him completely. This man, who'd been a stranger just days ago, had become someone she relied on, someone who made her feel protected and valued in a way she'd never experienced before. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. As they sat together in the darkness, Hannah became acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. The solid warmth of him, the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the faint scent of leather and wood smoke that clung to his clothes. She could feel his heartbeat where her shoulder pressed against his chest, strong and steady. When she tilted her head to look up at him, she found he was already looking down at her. "Hannah," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her breath catch. "I need to tell you something. I know this isn't the time or the place, and I know we have more important things to focus on right now, but I can't keep it to myself any longer." "What is it?" "I'm falling for you. Maybe I started falling the moment I saw you walk out of that courthouse with your head held high even though your whole world had just collapsed. Maybe it happened during these days on the trail, getting to know you, seeing your strength and your spirit. But it's happening, and I needed you to know." He paused, and she could see the vulnerability in his eyes even in the dim light. "I'm not asking for anything in return. I know you're dealing with enough already. I just wanted to be honest with you." Hannah's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. She should have been surprised, should have needed time to process this revelation, but somehow it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Because if she was honest with herself, she'd been falling too. "Yates," she said softly, "I'm falling too." She saw relief and joy flash across his face, and then he was cupping her cheek with his free hand, his thumb brushing across her skin with infinite gentleness. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes." He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, but Hannah had never been more certain of anything. When their lips met, it was soft and sweet and perfect. The kiss was unhurried, a gentle exploration that spoke of promise and possibility. Hannah felt warmth bloom through her entire body, pushing away the fear and cold and uncertainty. For this moment, nothing existed except the two of them and the connection sparking between them like lightning in a summer storm. When they finally pulled apart, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to win your appeal," he said. "We're going to get your land back, and then I'm going to court you properly, with flowers and Sunday dinners and all the things you deserve." Hannah laughed softly, the sound surprising her with its lightness. "I think we might be doing things a bit out of order. Maybe. But nothing about our story has been conventional so far. Why start now?" They stayed like that until dawn began to paint the sky, holding each other and talking in whispers about everything and nothing. When the sun finally rose, they mounted their horses and continued toward Little Rock, but everything felt different now. The journey had a new purpose beyond just legal vindication. They were fighting for a future together, for the possibility of building something beautiful from the ruins of loss and injustice. They reached Little Rock by mid-afternoon of the third day, dusty and tired but determined. The city was bigger than Bentonville, bustling with commerce and activity. Yates knew his way around and led them directly to a modest but clean boarding house run by the widow Alice Brennan he'd mentioned before. Alice was a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. When she opened the door and saw Yates, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. Yates Novak, as I live and breathe. I was hoping you'd come back through this way. She ushered them inside, her eyes curious but welcoming as she took in Hannah. And who might this young lady be? This is Hannah Whitmore, Yates said. She's fighting Silas Crawford for her land, and we're here to find evidence to support her appeal. Alice's expression darkened at Crawford's name. That snake. Come in, both of you. You look like you could use a meal and a bath. We'll talk after you've had a chance to rest. Hannah could have kissed the woman for her kindness. A hot bath and a real bed sounded like heaven after days on the trail. Alice showed them to separate rooms, and Hannah took her time washing away the dust and grime of travel. When she finally emerged, clean and dressed in her spare dress, she felt more human than she had in days. They gathered in Alice's parlor, where she'd laid out a simple but hearty meal of chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread. As they ate, Yates explained their plan to examine the land records. The county recorder's office is in the courthouse, Alice said thoughtfully. They keep all the deed records there, but you should know that the current recorder, a man named Douglas Finch, is friendly with Crawford. If you go in there asking questions about Crawford's deeds, word will get back to him within the hour. What do you suggest? Hannah asked. Alice tapped her fingers on the table, thinking. Finch has a clerk who does most of the actual work, a young man named Peter Walsh. He's honest, or as honest as anyone can be when they're working for a dishonest boss. If you could talk to him privately, away from the office, he might be willing to help you. Do you know where we can find him? Yates asked. He takes his supper at the same tavern every evening. The Red Rooster, down on Commerce Street. I've spoken with him a few times. He's a good sort, just trying to make a living. Alice looked between them seriously. But you need to be careful. If Crawford gets wind that you're investigating him, he'll do everything in his power to stop you. He has resources and connections that most people can't match. We'll be careful, Hannah assured her, but we have to try. I've lost too much to give up now. That evening, Hannah and Yates made their way to the Red Rooster. It was a modest establishment, cleaner than some taverns but nothing fancy. They found Peter Walsh at a corner table, a thin young man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. Yates approached him directly, but in a friendly manner that didn't seem threatening. Mr. Walsh, my name is Yates Novak. I was wondering if I might have a moment of your time to discuss a matter of some importance. Peter looked up warily. What kind of matter? The kind that involves land deeds and questions of authenticity. Yates pulled out a chair and sat down, Hannah taking the seat beside him. We need information, and we're willing to pay for your time and trouble. Peter glanced around nervously. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, Hannah said gently. We're not here to cause you problems, Mr. Walsh. We're trying to right a wrong. My land was taken from me based on a forged deed, and we believe the forgery can be proven by examining the record books in your office. Something flickered in Peter's eyes. Recognition, maybe, or sympathy. Even if what you're saying is true, I can't just let anyone come in and look at official records. There are procedures, permissions required. What if we came in during regular business hours and requested to see the records as ordinary citizens? Yates suggested. That's perfectly legal, isn't it? It is, but Mr. Finch would want to know why you're looking, especially if it involves anything to do with Silas Crawford. Peter lowered his voice. Crawford has the recorder in his pocket. Any inquiry that might threaten him gets shut down fast. Hannah felt despair beginning to creep back in, but Yates wasn't giving up. What if you looked at the records yourself, tonight after hours? You could examine the deed recorded in June of 1873 under the name of Thomas Whitmore, and another deed supposedly recorded at the same time under Crawford's name claiming the same property. If there are discrepancies, you could document them. And risk my job, or worse. Peter shook his head. I have a family to support. I can't afford to make enemies of powerful men. What about making things right? Hannah leaned forward, her voice passionate. My father worked that land for 8 years. He poured his life into it, and now I'm being told it never belonged to him at all. If you have children, Mr. Walsh, imagine someone taking their inheritance away based on lies. Imagine them being left with nothing because good people were too afraid to stand up for what's right. Peter was silent for a long moment, his expression troubled. Finally, he sighed. Give me 2 days. I'll look at the records and see if there's anything unusual. If I find something, I'll document it, but I'm not promising anything. And if anyone asks, we never had this conversation. Fair enough, Yates said. He slid several coins across the table. For your trouble and your risk. Peter pocketed the money quickly. Come to the courthouse in 2 days at noon. Ask to see records for your own property, nothing about Crawford. I'll have what I can find tucked inside your file if there's anything to find. They left the tavern feeling cautiously hopeful. 2 days felt like an eternity, but it was progress. Real, tangible progress. As they walked back to the boarding house through the gas-lit streets of Little Rock, Hannah felt Yates take her hand. It was a small gesture, but it filled her with warmth. We're going to win this, he said. I can feel it. Even if we do, there's still the matter of filing an appeal and convincing Judge Hartwell to reconsider his ruling. That could take months, and I don't know where I'll live or how I'll support myself in the meantime. Hannah voiced the worry that had been gnawing at her. Yates stopped walking and turned to face her, both of his hands now holding hers. Then you'll stay here in Little Rock where we can fight this properly. Alice has room at the boarding house, and I'll pay your expenses until this is resolved. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. Hannah, I meant what I said back in the ravine. I'm falling in love with you, and I want to see this through. Not just the legal battle, but everything that comes after. I want a future with you if you'll have me. His eyes searched hers in the lamplight. I know it's fast, and I know we're in the middle of a crisis, but sometimes you just know. And I know that you're the woman I've been waiting for without even realizing I was waiting. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, but these were different from the tears of loss and anger she'd shed lately. These were tears of joy and hope, and the overwhelming feeling of being seen and valued. I feel it too, she whispered. Like everything in my life has been leading to this moment to you. He kissed her then, right there on the street under the gas lamps, and Hannah didn't care who might see or what gossip it might generate. For the first time since her father's death, she felt like she had something to look forward to, something beyond just survival and grief. The next 2 days passed slowly. Hannah and Yates spent the time gathering more information about Crawford's operations. They interviewed several people who'd been swindled by him, documenting their stories and experiences. Each account added to the picture of a man who systematically exploited legal loopholes and forged documents to steal property from vulnerable people. Alice proved to be an invaluable ally. She introduced them to a lawyer named Samuel Fitzpatrick, who had a reputation for taking on difficult cases and fighting corruption. Fitzpatrick was an older gentleman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. He listened to their evidence and testimonies with growing interest. This is good work, he said, reviewing Yates's notebook. But it's circumstantial. To win an appeal, we need concrete proof that Crawford's deed is a forgery. Without that, Judge Hartwell has no grounds to reverse his decision. That's why we're hoping the county records will show something, Hannah explained. Discrepancies in the recording, evidence of tampering, anything that proves the document isn't legitimate. If you can get that proof, I'll take your case, Fitzpatrick said. And I won't charge you a penny until we win. I've heard about Silas Crawford, and I'd relish the chance to take him down." On the appointed day, Hannah and Yates arrived at the courthouse at noon exactly. The building was imposing, all stone and columns that spoke of authority and permanence. Inside, the recorder's office was a cramped room filled with filing cabinets and the musty smell of old paper. Peter Walsh was alone in the office, his employer apparently out to lunch. When he saw them, he gave a slight nod and said in a normal voice, "How can I help you folks today?" "I'd like to see the deed records for my property in Bentonville," Hannah said, giving the property description and date. "Of course. Just a moment." Peter disappeared into the back room and returned several minutes later with a thick file. He handed it to Hannah, and as he did, she felt him press a folded piece of paper into her palm. They took the file to a small table and pretended to review its contents, while Hannah carefully unfolded the hidden paper under the cover of the file. What she read made her heart race. Peter had found it, the evidence they needed. According to his notes, Crawford's deed had several suspicious elements. The ink used was a type that hadn't been commercially available until 1875, 2 years after the supposed recording date. The handwriting, while similar to other documents from 1873, had subtle differences that suggested it was a skilled forgery rather than the genuine article. And most damning of all, the page number sequence in the record book showed signs of alteration. A page had been removed and a new one inserted, likely replacing the genuine record of Thomas Whitmore's deed with Crawford's forgery. Peter had even managed to make photographic copies of the relevant pages, the images tucked into the file. The evidence was clear and damning. Crawford was a fraud, and now they could prove it. Hannah's hands shook as she carefully returned the documents to the file. She looked up at Peter, who was studiously working at his desk as if nothing unusual had happened, and mouthed, "Thank you." He gave the slightest nod in return. They left the courthouse in a state of controlled excitement, waiting until they were several blocks away before discussing what they'd found. Back at the boarding house, they spread the documents out on Alice's dining table and went over every detail with Samuel Fitzpatrick. "This is exactly what we need," the lawyer said, barely containing his excitement. "This proves not only that Crawford's deed is a forgery, but that there was an active conspiracy to alter official records. That's a criminal matter, not just a civil dispute. We can not only win your appeal, Miss Whitmore, but we can potentially have Crawford arrested and charged with fraud." "How long will the appeal process take?" Hannah asked. "Under normal circumstances, months. But Judge Hartwell is still in the area, finishing up his circuit. If we can get an emergency motion filed, we might be able to get a hearing within the week. Let me contact his clerk and see what can be arranged." The next few days were a blur of legal activity. Fitzpatrick filed the appeal along with a motion for an emergency hearing, citing new evidence of fraud and forgery. To everyone's surprise, Judge Hartwell agreed to hear the case. He was due to return to Bentonville anyway, and the serious nature of the allegations warranted immediate attention. They traveled back to Bentonville together. Hannah, Yates, Fitzpatrick, and even Alice, who insisted on coming to offer moral support. The hearing was scheduled for Monday morning, giving them just enough time to prepare their presentation. Crawford, for his part, seemed confident when they saw him outside the courthouse Monday morning. He was flanked by his lawyer, Vincent Mercer, and both men wore expressions that suggested they viewed the appeal as a minor annoyance rather than a serious threat. That confidence began to crack the moment Fitzpatrick started presenting their evidence. "Your Honor," Fitzpatrick began, "we have incontrovertible proof that the deed presented by Mr. Crawford is a forgery, and furthermore, that official county records were tampered with to support this fraudulent claim. He methodically walked Judge Hartwell through each piece of evidence. The anachronistic ink, the handwriting discrepancies, the altered page sequence in the record book, the photographic evidence Peter Walsh had provided. With each revelation, Crawford's face grew paler and Mercer's more agitated. "This is outrageous." Mercer jumped to his feet. "These allegations are baseless and defamatory. We demand to know where this so-called evidence was obtained." "From the official county records, as is any citizen's right," Fitzpatrick said calmly. "And we have multiple witnesses prepared to testify about similar schemes perpetrated by your client in other jurisdictions." Judge Hartwell held up his hand for silence. "Mr. Mercer, sit down. Mr. Crawford, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you forge this deed?" Crawford sputtered, his composure completely shattered. That is, the deed was provided to me by, there were assurances that it was legitimate." "That's not an answer," the judge said coldly. "Let me be more specific. Did you, or anyone acting on your behalf, create a false deed claiming ownership of property that rightfully belonged to Thomas Whitmore and his heirs?" The silence stretched out. Hannah held her breath, her hand finding Yates's under the table and gripping it tightly. This was the moment everything hinged on. "I invoke my right against self-incrimination," Crawford finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Judge Hartwell banged his gavel for order, his expression grim. "Mr. Crawford, by invoking that right, you've told me everything I need to know. In light of the evidence presented by Miss Whitmore's counsel, I am hereby reversing my previous ruling. The land in question is and always was the rightful property of Thomas Whitmore and his heirs. Miss Hannah Whitmore is the legal owner of said property, and Mr. Crawford's claim is declared null and void." Relief and joy crashed over Hannah like a wave. She felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were tears of happiness. Yates wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and she could see he was emotional too. But Judge Hartwell wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the county prosecutor for criminal investigation. The evidence suggests not only forgery but also tampering with official government records, which is a serious crime. Mr. Crawford, Mr. Mercer, you are both to remain in Bentonville pending that investigation. Bailiff, ensure they don't leave town." Crawford looked like he might be sick. Mercer was pale as death, and Hannah almost felt sorry for them. Almost, but not quite. They had tried to steal everything from her, and they had done it to countless others. Justice was being served. After the courtroom cleared, Hannah found herself surrounded by well-wishers. People who had known her father, who had worked with him, who had been outraged by the original verdict and were thrilled to see it overturned. But through it all, she kept coming back to Yates. He was her rock, her partner, her unexpected blessing in the middle of catastrophe. That evening, as the sun set over Bentonville, Yates drove Hannah out to her farm in a borrowed wagon. She hadn't been back since the original trial, too heartbroken to face the place knowing it wasn't hers anymore. But now, standing in the doorway of the farmhouse with Yates beside her, she felt like she was finally home. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him. "I would never have gotten this back without you. You saved me, Yates. You saved everything." "We saved it together," he corrected gently. "You never gave up, Hannah. You fought for what was right, even when it seemed hopeless. That takes real courage." They walked through the house, Hannah pointing out details and sharing memories. The kitchen where her mother had taught her to bake bread. The parlor where her father had read aloud from books on winter evenings. The bedroom where she dreamed of her future, never imagining it would include someone like Yates. They ended up on the front porch as darkness fell, sitting on the steps and watching fireflies dance across the fields. The summer air was soft and filled with the chirp of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. "What happens now?" Hannah asked. "For us, I mean. You have your cattle driving and I have the farm. Those aren't exactly compatible lives." Yates was quiet for a moment, and Hannah's heart sank, thinking he was about to tell her they couldn't be together. But then he turned to her with a smile that made her pulse race. "I've been thinking about that. Truth is, I've been ready to stop drifting for a while now. The cattle driving was good for helping me figure out who I am and what I want. And what I want is a place to belong, work that matters, and someone to build a life with." He took her hands in his. "I was thinking if you were agreeable I could stay here, help you work the farm, build it back up. I don't know much about farming, but I'm willing to learn. And I know a lot about cattle. We could maybe expand into ranching, raise beef cattle alongside your crops." Hannah felt like her heart might burst from happiness. "You'd really give up the trail for me, for this?" "I'm not giving up anything. I'm gaining everything that matters." He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes intense and sincere. "Hannah Whitmore, I love you. I think I've loved you since the moment I saw you refuse to let injustice break your spirit. I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you'll have me. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to work this land together and build something that will last." "Yes," Hannah said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes to all of it." "I love you too, Yates. So much it scares me sometimes. But it's a good kind of scared, the kind that comes from having something precious to lose and choosing to risk it anyway." He kissed her then, deep and passionate and full of promise. The kiss of two people who had found their way to each other against all odds and were committed to building a future together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates pressed his forehead to hers. "We should probably do this properly," he said. "With a ring and a proposal and asking for permission from, well, I suppose we don't have to ask anyone since you're your own woman and your father's gone." "Then let's make up our own traditions," Hannah suggested. "We'll ask each other. Yates Novak, will you marry me and be my partner in all things?" "Yes." "And Hannah Whitmore, will you marry me and let me love you for the rest of our days?" "Yes, absolutely yes." They married 3 weeks later in the small church in Bentonville. It was a simple ceremony, but everyone who mattered was there. Alice Brennan traveled from Little Rock, bringing Peter Walsh and his family as guests. Samuel Fitzpatrick attended, looking pleased with himself for having won such a significant case. Half the town turned out, people who had known Hannah's father and wanted to see his daughter happy. Hannah wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved all these years. Yates wore a new suit, looking uncomfortable in the formal clothing but devastatingly handsome nonetheless. When they said their vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the church, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers could be heard all the way down Main Street. The reception was held at the farm, with tables set up in the yard and food provided by seemingly everyone in town. There was music and dancing, and as Hannah waltzed with her new husband under the stars, she felt a sense of completeness she'd never known before. "Happy?" Yates asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Hannah replied. "Especially after everything that happened. It feels like a miracle." "Not a miracle, just two people who refused to give up and found each other in the process." He spun her in a circle, making her laugh. "Although I'll admit, the timing was pretty miraculous. If I hadn't been in that courthouse that exact day, if I hadn't heard your case, we might never have met. Then I'm grateful for circuit judges and cattle drives and whatever force in the universe brought you to Bentonville at exactly the right moment." Hannah rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever regret it? giving up the freedom of the trail. Not for a second. This is freedom too, just a different kind. The freedom to build instead of wander, to plant roots instead of moving on. The freedom to love someone and be loved in return. He kissed the top of her head. Besides, we'll have plenty of adventures right here. Farming is never boring. He was right about that. The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work and challenges. They planted crops and acquired a small herd of cattle, combining Hannah's knowledge of the land with Yates's expertise in animal husbandry. There were setbacks. A late frost that damaged some crops, a sick calf that required round-the-clock care, a leaky barn roof that needed extensive repairs. But they faced every challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. Meanwhile, Crawford's legal troubles had mounted. The investigation into his fraudulent activities had uncovered evidence of dozens of similar schemes across 3 states. He was eventually tried, convicted, and sentenced to 10 years in prison. His lawyer, Vincent Mercer, had his license to practice law revoked and faced his own criminal charges. Peter Walsh, who had bravely provided the evidence despite the risks, was promoted to county recorder when Douglas Finch was removed from office for his complicity in Crawford's schemes. As word spread about Crawford's conviction, other victims began coming forward to reclaim their properties. Yates spent considerable time traveling to help these people, sharing what he'd learned and connecting them with honest lawyers like Samuel Fitzpatrick. It became something of a mission for him, ensuring that the injustice that had affected so many was finally being corrected. Through it all, Hannah and Yates grew not just as partners but as deeply connected souls. They learned each other's rhythms, their quirks, their dreams and fears. They laughed together over silly things and supported each other through difficult times. They built a life that was rich not in material wealth, but in love and purpose and satisfaction. 2 years into their marriage, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. They had talked about having children, dreaming of a family to fill the farmhouse with noise and laughter, but the reality of it was both wonderful and daunting. "What if I'm not a good father?" Yates asked one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on Hannah's still flat stomach. "I never really had a good example. My father was harsh and distant. What if I don't know how to be different? You'll be wonderful," Hannah assured him. "You're kind and patient and loving. Our child will be lucky to have you as a father. And we'll figure it out together, just like we've figured out everything else." Their son was born in the spring of 1884, a healthy baby with a lusty cry and a shock of dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Hannah's father, with the middle name Jack to honor the rancher Yates had worked for in Texas. Little Tommy, as they called him, was a joy and a handful from the very beginning. Watching Yates with their son, Hannah fell in love with him all over again. He was patient and gentle, singing lullabies in his deep voice and walking the floor at night when Tommy was fussy. He made faces to coax out smiles and built elaborate towers of blocks for the baby to knock down. He was everything Hannah had known he would be and more. The farm prospered under their joint stewardship. They expanded the cattle operation and developed a reputation for raising quality beef. Hannah's crops flourished, and they began selling surplus produce at market in addition to their own consumption. They hired a few ranch hands to help with the growing workload, providing employment to local young men who were eager to learn. Alice Brennan became a frequent visitor, a sort of adopted grandmother to Tommy and a dear friend to both Hannah and Yates. Peter Walsh and his family visited occasionally, and a genuine friendship developed between the two couples. Samuel Fitzpatrick remained their lawyer and advisor, and his friendship was invaluable as they navigated the sometimes complex world of property ownership and business. When Tommy was 3, Hannah became pregnant again. This time it was twin girls, and the birth was difficult. For a terrifying few hours, Yates thought he might lose Hannah, and he prayed harder than he'd ever prayed in his life. But Hannah was strong, and with the help of a skilled midwife and sheer determination, she came through. The twins, named Margaret Rose and Catherine Grace, were tiny but healthy. "Our family is complete," Hannah said weakly as she held the swaddled babies, one in each arm, while Yates sat on the bed beside her and Tommy peered curiously at his new sisters. "It's perfect," Yates agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "You're perfect, all of you." The years rolled by in a blur of activity and love. Tommy grew into a sturdy boy who loved working with the cattle alongside his father. The twins were spirited and clever, keeping everyone on their toes with their mischief and laughter. The farm continued to thrive, becoming one of the most successful operations in the area. Hannah and Yates grew older together, silver threading through their hair and laugh lines creasing their faces. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming something rich and complex and utterly irreplaceable. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Yates took Hannah back to the spot where they'd first kissed, in the ravine where they'd hidden from outlaws all those years ago. It took some doing to get away from the children, but they managed it, leaving the kids in the capable hands of Alice, who was visiting for the occasion. "I wanted to come back here," Yates said as they stood in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. "To the place where I first told you I was falling in love with you." "I remember," Hannah said softly, taking his hands. "I was so scared and overwhelmed, but you made me feel safe. You made me feel like everything might actually be all right. It turned out better than all right, didn't it?" He pulled her close. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd walked past that courthouse that day, if I'd just minded my own business and moved on with my cattle drive. I would have missed out on the best thing that ever happened to me." "We found each other when we both needed it most," Hannah said. "You gave me back my land and my future, but more than that, you gave me yourself. You gave me a partnership and a love I never even knew I wanted. And you gave me a home. A real home, not just a place to sleep between cattle drives, but a place to belong. You, the kids, this farm, it's everything I didn't know I was searching for all those years." He kissed her softly, the kiss of two people who knew each other completely and loved what they knew. They stood there in the peaceful woods, holding each other and remembering all they'd been through together. The legal battle that had brought them together. The moment they'd admitted their feelings. The wedding, the births of their children, the challenges and triumphs of building a life from scratch. It all felt like chapters in a larger story, one that was still being written with each passing day. As they walked back to the farm hand in hand, Hannah felt a profound sense of gratitude. She'd lost so much when her father died and Crawford had tried to steal her land. But in fighting to reclaim what was hers, she'd found something far more precious than property. She'd found love, partnership, and a future brighter than anything she could have imagined during those dark days in the courthouse. The farmhouse came into view, smoke curling from the chimney and the sound of children's laughter drifting across the fields. Home. Their home. Built on land that had been fought for and won, but more importantly, built on a foundation of love and mutual respect and unwavering commitment. Yates squeezed her hand. "Ready to go back to the beautiful chaos," Hannah laughed. "Always. As long as I'm facing it with you." They walked toward their home together, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something remarkable in the process. Behind them, the Arkansas sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. But ahead of them, the lights in the farmhouse windows glowed warm and welcoming, promising love and laughter and all the small moments that made up a life well lived. Inside, the children greeted them with enthusiastic hugs and stories about their day with Grandma Alice, who was laughing at their antics and clearly enjoying every minute. Tommy wanted to show his father a drawing he'd made of their prize bull. The twins were arguing cheerfully about whose turn it was to set the table for supper. As Hannah moved through her kitchen, preparing the evening meal with Yates at her side, helping in the easy way of long married couples who knew each other's rhythms, she felt overwhelmingly blessed. This life, these people, this love, it was worth fighting for. It was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty and struggle. After supper, with the children finally in bed and Alice retired to the guest room, Hannah and Yates sat on their front porch in the rocking chairs they'd bought their second year of marriage. The night was warm and full of cricket song, and the stars spread overhead in an endless canopy. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Hannah asked. "When you approached me outside the courthouse." "I said I thought Crawford was a fraud and I might be able to prove it," Yates replied. "Best decision I ever made talking to you that day. You changed my life, Yates Novak. You gave me hope when I had none left. You fought for me when you had no reason to, and you loved me when I felt completely unlovable." Hannah reached over and took his hand. "I thank God for you every single day. The feeling is entirely mutual, Mrs. Novak." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "You made me want to stop running. You made me want to stay, to build, to commit to something bigger than myself. You gave me purpose and love and a family. I'm the luckiest man alive." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked, watching the fireflies dance in the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, and one of the cattle lowed softly in response. The sounds of their life, their land, their home. "I love you," Hannah said, as she had said countless times before and would say countless times again. "I love you too," Yates replied, the words as true and solid as the earth beneath their feet. And in that moment, with the stars overhead and their family sleeping peacefully inside, with the land secure and their future bright, Hannah and Yates Novak knew that they had found what everyone searches for but few ever truly discover. A love that endures, a partnership that strengthens through adversity, and a happily ever after earned through courage, determination, and the willingness to fight for what matters most. Their story had begun with injustice and loss, but it had transformed into something beautiful. From the ashes of a legal battle that could have destroyed Hannah, a love had bloomed that enriched both their lives beyond measure. The circuit judge had ruled against her claim, but a cowboy with a good heart and stubborn determination had found new evidence and won her appeal. In the process, he'd won her heart and she had won his, and they lived, truly and completely, happily ever after.